currently going through a divorce and a lot of other things. And so just wondering, as you look at the practices, what would be, because you mentioned, if you are gossiping, then silence is kind of the practice that you've tried.
Right.
So with something like that, and then is there a guideline or some helpful tool for looking at other things that we might be dealing with of what we would turn to as a practice?
All right, that is a good and a difficult question. I usually start at about 40,000 feet because I feel more comfortable up there. So as a recovering psychologist who never had anyone come to the office that wasn't able to quickly talk to me about compassion deficits, I do think there's something fundamental here that that God is love. We are created in the image of love. Love is indispensable for human thriving. And so it wasn't more than a couple of years in before I realized, wait a minute, if you go with 3 emotions and then add a couple for sure, it had covered everything I'd ever seen anybody about. Those emotions were, in no certain order, depression, anger, anxiety. And if you add to that the relationship conflicts that can be downstream from those emotions are part of the picture, and substance abuse as far away as deadening the pain of those emotions. That covered it all, basically. I mean, for my practice with adults and so forth. Now, what's interesting to me about that, what is the opposite of love and peace and joy? Well, what is the opposite? What is the opposite of love and peace and joy? The opposite of peace, anxiety. The opposite of joy, depression. The opposite of love, well, you could say anger. All right, I'm not trying to oversimplify, but I'm trying to say when you say anger, there's also another simple way of looking at emotions, always in terms of love or compassion deficits. Anger is the emotion of a frustrated goal. What is the most deep and underlying goal that human beings have? To be loved and accepted and received. If somebody is angry, my first question inside of myself that I'm listening for is, I wonder what the frustrated goals are in this person's life. So I don't think anger is as easy to match a spiritual discipline to, although we could talk about that and brainstorm about that, as something like gossip, where it's a little bit more obvious, the sins of omission, the sins of commission, practicing disciplines that strengthen the not doing or the doing muscle. Anger is a little bit broader picture, and it's a little bit harder to just like, okay, here's a discipline for anger. I don't think I could do that. For anger, I would just want to listen in love to what goal is being frustrated.
Can you extend that just a little bit more and in terms of the way you broke down that anger to the anxiety, since that's a huge almost.
Oh, well, yeah, the big, well, this is just me and just what I had in the back of my mind as a therapist. The big three painful emotions, depression, anger, anxiety. So I'll start with depression in terms of love. Depression is, I know I'm being overly simplified. I know about, biochemistry and all that, and the necessity of medication in lots of cases. But at this big picture level, depression is the emotion we feel with loss. It would be unhealthy to not be depressed if you lose something very valuable. And the most obvious thing is someone you love. You're going to be depressed or something's wrong that you're not depressed. You don't talk to a psychologist about it unless the depression goes too deep or lasts too long. So if somebody is depressed, yes, I'm also thinking about family history and all kind of appropriate things and whether medication is needed and psychological assessment, all that stuff. But I'm also thinking about what might the role of loss be and how that might relate to being loved and feeling loved and accepted and so forth. With anger, I've already covered as far as the emotion, the frustrated goal. But what's the number one goal everyone has is to be loved. That's one of the first places I'm going to look for, something that might be being frustrated. And then peace, I like Dallas Willard's definition, the assurance of abundance. The assurance of the abundance of the resources we have. Well, what have we just said might be the most valuable resource you can have? to feel like that you're loved, to be loved. So, and just finish up with that, some of them match that model better, and something like depression, probably not a clear match. I mean, you could come up with some things. We could look at the disciplines in terms of, the discipline of celebration, obviously, but that might, the person might not embrace that quite so quickly. But yes.
I would like to go back to a slide in your presentation to just touch on a little bit more, but I just want to tell a very quick story first that kind of leads up to my question.
And can everyone hear?
It's a very good friend of mine years ago who was the most efficient administrator I've ever met, was interviewing for a job because at the time John Maxwell was at her church, and we're all like, you would be the perfect person for it. She had the interview over the phone, and they said, how did you come to know Christ? And she related her story, and she was a wonderful Christ follower. She said, well, I was in church one Sunday, and this, preacher was talking, and I just had this feeling come over me where I just knew. And the lady said, well, what she was looking for is
Decision.
the words,
Yeah.
the decision, and so they did not hire her. And I just remember just feeling so frustrated and empty, and here your topic was kind of about this new way to look at salvation, or new way to explain salvation, a life that requires a new way of seeing Him. I know my friend was saved, but, and I didn't grow up in the Baptist tradition, but just the emphasis on the words, that you're born again, when did you make your decision, etc. And your slide on salvation about the path and the healing, can you maybe just dive a little deeper in between
Sure.
that the words that we're so used to hearing about what salvation is and what you're describing as salvation?
Right. One thing that got me thinking about this really early on was kind of odd. Family devotions are really important in our home. And so I thought, I like to put words on paper, so I thought, I got an idea. This was after discovering that there are 366 scenes in the Synoptic Gospels if you lay them out in chronological order. One for every day plus leap year. And that was just too good to resist. And so I had this family of four getting on the wrong ride at an amusement park, traveling back in time, and kind of in an Ignatian sense being present with Jesus in all the scenes of the Gospels. And the narrator was a family dog, so you could kind of sniff things out and describe all with the five senses. And the tour guide was a 5-year-old angel who could answer all the tough questions. The tour guide. So, but the reason I'm telling you that is that was pretty complex. That's a lot of 366, and so two things struck me. One was, my goodness, about 20% of these scenes seems to be Jesus arguing with the Pharisees, and this is getting hard to make fun. But the other one was late in the journey, sitting around a campfire, or whatever the setting was, when Jesus asked the question to Peter, who do you say that I am? And he answers correctly, the Son of God. And Jesus is so happy, and affirming, thank you, and this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but well, it hit me like a ton of bricks. They've been together 2.5 years. They didn't cover the 4 spiritual laws the first night around the campfire. It was like, that was jaw dropping for me. And so that was before kind of looking. I wonder how the early church thought about this process. So the definition I was giving you is from I found it. There's a little book called, I was talking to someone about this, A Beginner's Introduction to the Philokalia or the Philokalia. The Philokalia, if you've never heard of it, it is like a 3-volume, sometimes I think published as 5-volume set of writings written over 11 centuries by 25 different authors. It's on the soul, basically. So it's wisdom from monastic traditions, mostly the Christian, Eastern Christian expression of the faith. 25 authors, and but it's pretty dense. I mean, it's more dense than Dallas Willard. So somebody came up with a great idea of having a beginner's introduction, and this beginner's introduction is 100 pages, And it defines 20 terms that the author says, you need to know these 20 terms before you tackle the other one. It's easy to read, fun to read. I was reading it devotionally like 6 times through. And on the 6th time through, I realized for every term I'd written in the margin, and this is where Dallas Willard says this.
Oh, wow.
So that's when the connection between Willard and the early church has been dramatic for me ever since. And so, for example, one of the terms was salvation. And so in the Philokalia, in the ancient faith, a paraphrase, this is pretty close, it's salvation is the synergistic interplay of grace and participation. You don't argue about it. You say by grace, you say by participation or effort. It's both. The synergistic interplay of grace and participation on the healing journey to union with God. So that's the healing, the sozo, the hospital. It's not taking the courtroom out of the equation. That's there too, but there's not leaving the hospital out. Healing journey toward union with God. There is a sense, and Jason, you may want to edit this out later, what I'm about to say. No, but there's a sense. There's a sense, I believe, that one of the reasons Renovari came into existence is the loss of some of that wisdom. And Willard, he wasn't reading the Philokalia in private and not telling anybody. He read everything. I'm sure he read that too, but it wasn't that. It's just a brilliant man with a high view of Scripture, thinks outside the box, classic philosophical training, and he reads Scripture, and he comes up with the same stuff as the early church did, in my opinion. And so the salvation was viewed very differently. It's very downstream that the focus became more on a crisis decision. And anyway, but that's, and I'm not against that. I just don't think it's the whole story. That's all.
Sounds really just incomplete.
Yeah. Yeah, but I wish the people that ask her, can you tell us more about your present healing journey back toward union with God? And the phrases with Renovari and the early church are so similar. They don't say as much union with God. No, they say authentic transformation. They say Christian spiritual formation. Well, what does that look like? Well, it looks like the pathway toward union with God. Yes. One, two. Tim, I think Tim was first.
Okay. I wanted to reference your comments on why spiritual formation isn't working that you shared this morning. The problem with the Great Commission, again, as we interpret it, perhaps I think you said to the exclusion of the Great
Commandments. Yeah.
Could you talk more about that?
Yeah, and that came up today, right? Not yesterday. Oh, yeah, okay. Because it could have been either day. First of all, if you, does most everybody know about the Conversatio Divina website? You've probably been, someone pointed to it by Renovari. We share stuff. Renovari is like a big time friend. But it's just Conversatio Divina. It's an app. It's free. Everything on it's free. But if you can hear the talk by this person, that'd be the best thing to do. It's Kristen with a K Johnson, and it was a 2024 academic conference back in May. And I would just listen to her talk. It's very, very good. The talks are done in 20 minutes. It's not real long. But the paper was just saying that with the emphasis on, when I say emphasis on the Great Commission, I don't mean the process or the idea. I mean that there's a formal heading in Scripture, Great Commission, and you lose the emphasis about it. Well, the Great Commission is to make disciples who are baptized in the reality of Trinitarian presence, but it makes it easier to focus on the crisis point, the decision. It comes with revivalism, and it just was a phase in church history, and it gave us a lot of good things. Revivalism is not a bad thing. Evangelicalism is not not a bad thing. It's a good thing. I'm glad to have gone to an evangelical seminary. But if it takes you away, I mean, even the title of Dallas's book, The Great Omission. What's the Great Omission? Leaving the process of discipleship out of it. Well, what's the process of discipleship? One way of looking at it is a training program for developing people who routinely can live out the Supreme Commandments. You can take the emphasis away from the outcome of. So back to your question, the interview question, it'd been far better to say, can you tell us about how loving you've become now that you're on this pathway? Can you tell us about the love that you experience on a daily basis for the Trinity? How does that play out? How's that part of your life? Oh, and then, and on the back row there, Alexis, thank you. I knew it started with an A, and I know our mutual friend Shane, but I was blanking.
No, that's right. It was only, how do I spell Philocoli?
Sorry?
How do I spell Philocoli?
Oh, if it's a spelling question, I got to ask Regina. But no, I think I got this one. I think it's P-H-I-L-O-K. A-L-I-A. Thank you.
And you said the beginner's introduction.
I would go, oh yes, I wouldn't start with the 5 or 3 volumes. I'd go with the beginner's introduction. And that is written by Anthony Canieris. Yes.
So I think it was yesterday, you did say something about a time when you were discouraged about whether or not spiritual transformation could really happen.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
I'd rather not.
Okay.
No, I'm
How did you
no, it was just it was a no, it was you know, I mentioned, you know,
Yes.
Marianas, I mean, Alpine Peaks, Marianas Trenches. I mean, I have a hard time with questions like that. The old joke is, doctor walks into a hospital and patient sitting on the edge of the bed, and one foot's in a bucket of boiling water, the other foot's in ice water, and the doctor says, "How you feeling?" And the person says, "Oh, well, on average, pretty good." So it's kind of like that with. It was kind of a dark night of the soul time, and there'd probably been some kind of, no one that anybody would know, but like some prominent formation people that weren't acting very loving, and I was with a good friend where I felt like I could be honest, and I said, I need somebody to tell me this actually works.
The reason I ask that is because I think it's important for all of us. I think there are times, you know, you have a week like this, and very often you feel like really doing well, and then the reality of back home, and you sometimes question, was I just manipulated? Was this just?
Yeah.
And I think the fact that someone like you with all this experience go through that too is important for all of us to remember.
Well,
Because we can easily get discouraged, and not giving up is really important in this process.
if Mother Teresa can be so rawly honest, I mean, yeah, then any of us can.
Exactly.
But I think some of us have been practicing spiritual disciplines before we came. So to just be continuing and understanding that, you know, we're moving towards something. One thing I always remember is that, especially when I'm in prayer, is that prayer may not change the situation, but it changes me.
Right. That's good. Yeah, Dallas would like to point out that spiritual disciplines are nothing to feel elite or because spiritual disciplines it's remedial work. I mean, it's like Babe Ruth. I mean, Pete Rose. You know, I practice what I'm not good at, kind of thing. Yeah. Now that's different than grace. Dallas also like to say, as I'm sure you've heard, who needs more grace? Who uses more grace? A sinner or a saint? And his surprising answer to some is a saint. He says they go through grace like a 747 on takeoff. Spiritual disciplines are for those of all of us who need extra help in experiencing grace. Need remedial practice. Yes.
Yeah. So in seems like in course one, we're spending a lot of time on the V part of the VIM model, the vision.
That's exactly right. Yep.
And I think, I'll just speak for myself, and see where there's this gap between my vision of God, a picture of self. Are there any, what are the benefits of, or are there any dangers of practicing the means if the vision is perhaps not as skewed, or do you just?
Yeah.
Is there an order to the VIM that if you start at the back side and move, does it move backwards?
That is a very important thing, I think, and that's one of the the area that you're bringing up is why Dallas Willard would say 80% of sermons should be about vision. The vision drives it all. It's the most important thing. To state the obvious, you've got a vision of God that is pathological, and angry God, any of the false views of God. And spiritual formation is about the enjoyment of abiding in Trinitarian presence. Well, give me a break. You're going to look for ways to either avoid that or look for an appealing legal loophole that says, well, wait a minute, I signed the contract. I closed the deal. So I'm glad that's done. Now I can go live however I want to. So means without vision is legalism, is pharisaical. The means without the vision doesn't get you anywhere. Yes.
Personal question. You identify yourself as a recovering psychologist.
I do.
What does that mean?
Well, it doesn't mean anything bad. I just, I have loved being a psychologist, and I just started liking spiritual formation more, and I just realized after a while, it's been 5 years since I've charged Blue Cross for anything. I just like to have conversations about spiritual things over coffee with folks. I'm going to quit. I mostly am saying I'll always be a psychologist. I just don't keep up with the field anymore. So don't ask me about recent research or stuff like that. But not recovering in a negative sense. Although I did, really, I did make a great mistake. I knew that I was an extreme introvert. So I knew I could never be a pastor. So I thought I picked an introverted discipline. And I got about 2 years into being a psychologist, and I realized I have made a huge mistake. I'm in somebody else's world all day long. I went through a period in private practice, you can ask Regina, where the only good time of the week was Friday night. Because Saturday morning, I'm already dreading Monday. And not because it's not good things are happening, it's just the introvert thing. I'm just drained.
So, because you do talk about the integration of psychology with the spiritual.
Yes.
And knowing that for so many, and for continuing the church, the spiritual world has an aversion to or a fear of, and or the other extreme of bringing all their psychology and not relying enough on the spiritual to it. Can you kind of talk a little bit about that?
I could talk about that for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But it's my second favorite topic. Well, one thing, three things. Number one, it's almost funny to talk about the integration of psychology and spirituality because they were never disintegrated. With the birth of modern psychology in the laboratory of Wilhelm Wundt in Leipzig, Germany, and psychology saying at the influence of modernism, if you can't see it, you can't measure it, doesn't exist. Psychology distanced itself from matters of spirit and soul. And, theology, about that time, theology's escorted off campus, no longer the queen of the sciences, because you're dealing with things you can't see or measure. We're embarrassed by that. And so for about 75 years, that was just the way it was. But in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, a desire by Christians to both study psychology and not do that came along. And so you had this whole huge integration movement. I went to the first school that you could go to to get a PhD that was APA, American Psychological Association approved. Now they're probably 12 where you can get a terminal degree, and 100 you get a master's degree. I mean, it's kind of its own sub-discipline. So first, they were never disintegrated. I like the word, integral better than integrated. Second thing is, there may only be two things. The types of integration follows John Wesley's quadrilateral.
Love it, yeah, sure.
So John Wesley's quadrilateral. How do you know that you know something? When there's an alignment of reason and scripture and tradition and experience. There are 5 major schools of integrating psychology and theology. They're all 4 of them are tied to those corners. I mean, not on purpose; they just are. There's the biblical counseling. That's more the scripture emphasis. There's the tradition focus. That's more the history of psychology before modern psychology. There's the experience emphasis. And I actually wrote the chapter for that one. And I only say that because it basically is a chapter in an integration book on if Dallas Willard were my therapist. but it's pulling in, it's looking to spiritual direction and formation and saying, why aren't we learning from what they're doing for the person?
What's that text called?
It's called it's one of those IVP five views, five approaches, yeah. And then you've got the reason, which is more an approach to integration that is, there's nothing wrong with it, but there's not much integration with it. It's just basically modern psychology, but you put a fish on your business card. and the 5th one would be integration, that kind of drawing from all 5 of them. So I think first, I don't think they're ever disintegrated. There are 5 approaches that make a lot of sense that all have to do with how we know things. And the one that's more spiritual, if you will, is the experiential corner. And about the only other thing I'd say is then you got the problem of doing it with professional integrity. I mean, you can't just decide that, I wrote something about it I mean, you can't just be an integrated mental health professional without there being some warning to the person you're working with. I would usually say it like this: how much integration you're allowed to do depends on where 3 roulette wheels stop spinning. And the first roulette wheel is the presenting problem. Some presenting problems lend themselves to spiritual discussions, others don't. The other is level of training. You can't do things that you haven't been trained to do, so it takes additional training to become bi or trilingual and bio-tricultural. So you got to prove that you can do that. And the third one is the stage of the relationship. Usually the integrative stuff comes downstream after you know you're working with a Christian client and that issues like God view and view of self and spiritual issues are part of what's contributing to the pain. If those 3 things line up, then you've got all the room in the world to do that kind of approach. Yes?
But don't you think that a lot of people's issues would be related to some of those dysfunctional views of self and God, even if they don't articulate a belief?
Yes, I do, but I feel like I need to wait to hear it coming from the person first, but yeah. And an integrative type approach, that would be part of and then we're probably getting in areas that everybody's not that interested in. Well, I mean, I'm just assuming because not what you're saying, just the integration thing in general. I don't want to take up too much time or bore you with it, but it becomes part of the process from the day one. In other words, the way an intake interview is done has a section where you can ask those kind of questions. You just are looking and feeling things out as you go the whole way, and not just one size fits all. We're gonna. Yes.
Gary, I love in your story you talked about this woman who had electricity, but she would switch it on and look for her match.
And that story is from Trevor. I was waiting to see if he was going to tell it himself, but I got that story from Trevor.
So I love that part, and was just wondering I just saw her as somebody who's blind, and I'm just trying to connect it with your statement of
Seeing,
seeing.
yeah.
And I just see her as a light. And how do we move, or how do we get to a place where we realize that we need to see and
Yeah, no, that's very good. I don't know there's a strong bridge that ties those two stories together exactly. At one level, the match story, that's for just like any Christian, is for are we taking advantage of what's being offered as far as the invisible presence of the Trinity and the conversations and I mean, it's that if it's not part of the whole process or even how we see salvation, then maybe we just aren't we're not turning the lights on all day long. The seeing thing, and that's more inspired by Robert Barron and his book that I read 20 plus years ago, and now I see Theology of Transformation. I brought that story in because I think if somebody gets that connection, then Dallas Willard's four concerns seem as brilliant as I think they are brilliant. That he's talking about that there is a reality in the world, that modernism, with all the good things that have come from modernism, I'm not bashing it, I'm glad for modern trained surgeons, but you just aren't considering that we actually do live at the intersection of two landscapes, and one is invisible. It involves the kingdom and the Trinity. And it's a matter of seeing in the sense of recognizing that. Just do I recognize, is it on my radar that this is here and now? And then if it is, then you see that the way Jesus made disciples in the Gospels is not different than how he makes disciples now. Yes.
I found out that they're not going to do the Enneagram here. Do you know why?
I didn't know.
Because I've seen books where they talk.
Oh, you mean it's not part of the curriculum here?
Yeah,
Oh,
It's not
well,
part of the
you
Is it
could.
not?
You could throw a rock and hit most anybody that could tell you all about it. I mean, I know that. I mean, to talk to you about it.
It
I know
doesn't have experience or
Lacey and
significance
Jean.
or
And,
anything.
oh, it's not because of a negative. Shoot, we did this is also on the Conversatio website. Chris, we did a filming project with him. It's supposed to be in the Judean wilderness,
Okay.
but it was COVID and a whole lot of things, so it ended up being in the Tucson wilderness. In fact, you'll occasionally see a car go by in the background, but it's very good. So he was going to do talks on desert spirituality involving vices and virtues, introducing personalities from the desert and so forth. But I got him to agree, because he doesn't know much about the Enneagram. I just said, will you use this order of presentation? So because he presents them in the order they appear on the Enneagram, then we got somebody to write a study guide that ties it to the Enneagram. So that's up on the website now. It's both Chris teaching on the vices and a study guide for how it connects to the Enneagram.
Okay, thank you very much.
On the Conversatio.
Sorry?
On the Conversatio.
Yes, yep. Yes.
I'm wondering, with your experience with people struggling with mental illness, if you would know of any particular ways that are specific to reaching them with God's love, or the idea of salvation, spiritual formation for someone who may struggle.
That's a very good question, a very broad question. So I'm torn between like the view from 40,000 feet answer and kind of a response and more of a personal response or a practical response. I mean, that's such a broad range. I'll just give you the two extremes. One extreme is if you're dealing with someone that it's an organic situation, You know, that this is a biochemical imbalance, or it's a from birth kind of situation that's now playing out. I mean, there's no better, more loving thing to do than for the right medications to be had, and just kind of all of that. On the other hand, you're still offering and modeling love. I mean, if you're the mental health professional, you've got other things that can be offered, but your presence and listening presence and love is still part of it. And for a caregiver, it's still love. I feel like the best thing that can be given is either referral and in a significantly difficult situation, referral and the right medication, and simultaneous empathy and love that just is with them in the midst. Otherwise, we would probably need to get into, and I wouldn't have a lot to say about it, the 300 different type of specific mental health conditions that might be part of the equation.
If we're talking about quite severe mental illness, like schizophrenia, or
Yeah. No, I hear you. Then well, my father struggled with a pretty severe mental illness, and so the initial most loving thing was the right treatment, and that's and then the second most loving thing was married someone who consistently gave love and care. I mean, it's just not. It's not like what I can't come up with. I'm afraid without like listening for an hour or two, and then they might not know. Is kind of matching a specific intervention with a specific problem. But the big picture is don't ignore the need for any kind of organic correction that can be made, and the power of love. But then also the caregiver may also need, I'm sure would need support, because it can be a very demanding situation, a very seemingly unfair situation.
It's a big problem now in the church, I think everybody would agree, because we tend to be a lot of times that's the first place people come that don't fit anyplace else. They'll come to the church and you find they have a problem, and we don't know what to do.
It's going to sound like a broken record. I know I promised you 3:30, and some people need to go to things, so maybe this will be the last thing. It's going to sound like a broken record. On the Converse ITO website, there's an article by a friend, and it's about it's about the church as a sleeping giant of the mental health world, just making the same point you're making.
Obviously, I don't know that website as well as you do.
Well,
No, I'm just teasing.
I will. All right, I want to respect your need for sunshine, so
Yes.
if there's a burning question, I'll stick around for a while, one-on-one or something, but I want to make sure that feels free to enjoy the day.
Thank you.